Apologies for my provocative slide to start with. Hopefully it captures the attention. It sort of captures the vibe, I guess, of the talk. So um, let me, okay, so my background, I'm a senior lecturer in cognitive neuropsychology and a senior research fellow. My background is in neuroscience. I trained at the San Institute at the University of Queensland. And my current research focus is cognitive enhancement and social neuroscience. And it's through the social neuroscience framework that I'm going to be talking to you today about empathy, its role in AI, and perhaps some of the challenges and ethical questions that need to be thinking of. So I'm certainly new to the digital mental health field and absolutely new to the field of artificial intelligence. So I'm talking to you today with zero authority these areas, but hopefully I can bring something in terms of my social neuroscience background to how we interact with artificial intelligence, some of the questions that we need to be thinking about. So in my lab, we have ongoing projects looking at the use of AI as a training tool for clinical psychologists. We also are looking at cross-cultural religious attitudes towards AI. So who might benefit from AI? Who might use it? What are some of the barriers? How can we overcome those? I have a student who's interested in the use of AI in military context. So we know in hierarchical structures, if someone is commanding you to perform an action, you might feel a reduced sense of agency or responsibility for your actions. And in a military context these days, the person delivering that command or the thing delivering that command might be an AI algorithm. So how does that affect our agency, responsibility for our actions and that kind of so on. But with Blika, we're very interested in how artificial intelligence might engage the social brain. And I'm going to focus my talk a little bit on that. I'll just briefly touch on social cognition and the social brain. And then we're sort of looking at, well, can we fool the social brain with artificial intelligence? But ultimately, should we be fooling the social brain? And hopefully this talk presents a few challenges or reasons to pause for thought about what we are trying to achieve with digital mental health therapy, use of AI in delivering therapy in a widescreen. Okay, so if you think about how we predict behavior in others, so just to stick to the theme around belief, we have Dennis put forward this idea of the attentional stance. So we might look at predicting behavior from a physical stance, so just cause and effect. I put heat into water, it boils. We might think of a design stance. So we create a machine, we press buttons, we pull levers, and an outcome emerges. And we might think about the intentional stance, so beliefs and desires underlie behavioral outcomes. And this is the sort of stance we would take when we're interacting with other humans and perhaps other animals. But when we're interacting with social robots or artificial intelligence, we're sort of in a gray zone here where we're sort of interacting with a machine, a design system, but we might infer or consider that robot or artificial intelligence as having an intentional stance, i.e. hopes and desires. Now we can also consider in terms of a belief structure, but we can never truly know the minds of others. So as humans, we're always having to infer the mental states of others. We can go and say, well, we never truly know whether there are other minds. The only thing I can be certain of is that I exist, and perhaps this whole thing around me is an illusion. Perhaps there are no other minds. So we're constantly having to decipher, to infer the mental state of others, agency of other people. And this is a very unique human cognitive ability, and it shapes human society and allows humans to adapt and flourish to almost every corner of the globe. So we're not particularly strong, we're not particularly fast in terms of the animal kingdom, but we're very social, uh, and we're able to learn from others. We're able to pass it. We are able to pass information down from one generation to another. So our social lives and our social abilities have been fundamental to the success of humankind. Okay, so how do we access our minds? We have these terms that are used often in psychology and neuroscience, things like theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and others, and to understand that these states may differ. So what I believe might not be what someone else believes. And we can think about empathy. So the capacity to resonate with or vicariously experience the emotional state of others. So this person here that's about to cut through their finger into an orange, we might have a vicarious pain experience. We might pull away our finger as an empathetic response because we can almost feel the pain that they're about to experience ourselves. The social connection, just fundamental in general, is incredibly important to humans. We want to feel connected to those around us. So a little thought experiment, we'll just see if we can get this to work. So if you have a phone, you can scan the QR code and you can say, well, how long would you want to socially isolate yourself for 10,000 minutes? So no social media, no TV, nothing of any nothing with any social content. How long would you be willing to do that? I'll give you 10,000. Well, I won't. But I can give you 10. See if anyone wants to come. Let me know. You just need to put the phone if you want to do it, see if it works. Does anyone find someone put something in there? So it comes up. And we'll come back to it because of the time on last we'll see if it votes. Um, but usually people will say that they're not willing to socially isolate themselves, all that, all that. Ooh. Sorry. And so why is it? Okay, it's disappeared again. Sorry.
I was just thinking whether the 10,000 pounds worth isolation or not.
It seems to have disappeared. You see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Tag on to funny mode. So going to present. Sorry, I'm not sure what you can see. I can't really get this to work.
we can see the slides in a PowerPoint, so that's okay.
Okay. So why are people not so to socially isolate? Well, we are fundamentally social creatures. We rely on social groups to survive and thrive. Um, it's our ability to understand work with others that shapes human development, like I said before. So any absence of social connection is perceived as a threat. We're not comfortable if we're not with the company of people. And we've got a set of brain regions, this network of brain regions that have evolved to be especially interested in social cues. So think of theory of mind, there's meta-analysis that's brought together all of these studies to get people to think about other people and showing that we have consistent activity in these brain regions called medial prefrontal cortex, right and left temporal junction, and moving down the superior or medial temporal cortex. We get similar activity when we look at empathy. We get additional activity in an area called the insula, which is involved in understanding bodily symptoms, which aligns with this somatic marker hypothesis of understanding empathy from understanding our bodily state. So, can we fool this social brain network? And can we fool it with social robots or with artificial intelligence? And it's always important to remember that the ability to mimic and understand human emotions without feeling any emotion and create a sense of intimacy that is hard in order to it's almost a textbook definition psychology. Right? So I think we want to be careful when we're designing and rolling out these AI to what we are trying to achieve and what we're sort of introducing to the world. So we know that the social brain is fooled by avatars. So if we present real faces, avatars, but we see that avatars engage the social brain to a similar extent. We know social robots, if we have people interacting with robots, we start to see activity in similar brain regions to those shown before in this meta-analysis. So we see activity in medial prefrontal cortex and the temporal junctions. At the moment, it seems to be to a lesser extent when engaging with humans, but as robotics improve and it's coupled with artificial intelligence, you can imagine a time where we're really doing the social brain. There's a new neuroimaging technique called functional near-infrared spectroscopy that's being modeled here by these two children. It's a really interesting technique, uses light, shines light into the brain and reflects back, tells you whether it's hitting oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. And we can infer neural activity from that. And it's great because we don't have to be lying in a big tube like we do with MRI. So we can actually be walking around and interacting with other people or with social robots, for example. Using that technique, they've shown again, if we're looking into the eyes of a human, we elicit this activity in the social brain. If we are staring into the eyes of a social robot, we might find similar activity, but to a lesser extent. So it seems to be falling the social brain, or the social brain seems to be involved, interested in anything that seems to be social, human or not. So there are also been studies looking at oxytocin. So it's commonly known as the love drug, involved in social bonding, trust, affiliation. In this study here, they introduced a social robot. Some people were forming a relationship with this robot, others were not. And they showed that those living with the robot had increased oxytocin levels, showing or demonstrating affiliate relationship. They also showed that interacting with this robot would reduce cortisol. These are um, this is a sort of more biochemical evidence to suggest that social robots are able to trick or rely on the same underlying biochemical neurological processes as uh, if we're dealing with another human, for example. Some of the research that I've done, we've been using avatars as training tools for clinical psychology. So we prompt these AIs to act in a depressed or anxious way, and we get our clinical psychologists to practice their interviews so they can develop their skills, feel comfortable, reduce anxiety before moving on to practicing with real patients. Now, interestingly, we found lots of really interesting results, but one of the interesting things from a social psychology point of view is that when there was an avatar compared to the chatbot, even though it's the same information that's coming back to our clinical psychologists, they found the information from the avatar to be more trustworthy or more appropriate. So just the presence of what looks like a human seems to influence how we perceive, how we treat that information. And if we wanted to improve AI or social robots, we might want to think about how the human brain achieves empathy. And there are a number of theories. There's things like the mirror neuron system. So that's what here we chimpanzees. We have this pattern of neural activity that is comparable when the chimpanzee is grasping, reaching for a banana itself, when it's observing somewhat the same pattern. We also have this idea of interneural synchrony or resonance. So what we could be programming is, and probably this is already happening, is that our AIs could be monitoring movements and emotional expressions of the person that the AI is conversing with, and just subtly mimicking or synchronizing their movements or expressions to align themselves with their conversation with the partner. And by doing that, might induce or elicit a feeling of connection with the guy, which might improve the empathic relationship. But should we be calling it? So if you think of empathic AI, it's designed to understand, interpret, and respond to human emotions and expressions in a way that simulates human empathy. That has pros, so improved human-computer interaction, enhanced emotional support, leading to increased well-being. But I think there are challenges. And, there's things around the content of the therapy that's being delivered. So we've heard some horror stories of AI suggesting that people do horrible things to themselves or others. That's obviously an ethical concern. There's privacy around data sharing. There's the uncanny valley projection. So as these AIs that become increasingly human-like, humans might reject the AI that feels somewhat put off by the similarities. And I think we need to be aware of dependence on artificial intelligence. So, for example, here's a headline in The Guardian recently. I felt pure unconditional love for people who married an AI chatbots. So there's clearly a subset of people who might form problematic attachments to their AI. We've seen it in a number of stories recently. And this it cannot feel, or this is not real love. I quite like just using this line from the Tennyson poem. It's better to have loved the lost than never to have at all. In order for it to be unconditional love, or true love, I mean, there has to be a fragility. There has to be a chance that it's lost. And I think that's the same with all social interactions, including therapeutic relationships. There has to be a human element. There has to be a social fragility almost. for it to be a true, meaningful social interaction. So in a way, this person here is delusional. And if you think about what are the key factors for successful therapy, so a person wants to be ready and willing to engage, but there's this therapist-client alliance, right? So goals and tasks are clearly understood. These are not problematic, but it needs to be an empathetic, caring, and affirming therapist that the client feels seen and understood. Where you can see here from the slide here, I'm going to red process through empathetic because the AI might simulate empathy, but it cannot be empathetic. It might appear to be caring, but there is no one in there caring. The client is certainly not being seen and is not being understood in any real human way. In a way, we can think of AI as a kind of, in fact, therapeutic purposes, as a kind of rule, right? If you're starving, then fine, you're going to go back and ask for more, as a twist is here. But I think what we need to be thinking about is, well, how do we feed and nourish people in a better way? And if that's with AI, it needs to be social connection, social interaction has to be at the forefront of what we're wanting to achieve uh, with therapy. There's another consideration, a little bit around a guy who might be a bit delusional about his attachment to AI. So some people might have this kind of hyperventilating or overactive social brain and see agency where there isn't. So Chris Smith, a very famous neuropsychologist who did a lot of work on the positive symptoms of psychosis, framed it through this overactive social brain. So we might see agency or intentions in others that aren't there. And you can think about this in children. They tend to think of their teddy bears and dolls as having agency. Most children grow out of that. But if I gave you the option of throwing away a truck or a teddy bear, you'd probably throw away the truck first. Right? We still feel a little bit of attachment to things that appear to have agency. And we also see agency in things that clearly don't. So we see faces where there are none. And if we think about avatars, it's to be expected that we see agency in avatar, even when it's cartoon-like. But some of the AI chatbots now are incredibly realistic. So here's an image of one that we were using in one of our studies. I mean, a student right there, you probably wouldn't know that it's a new AI. They're incredibly realistic. And some people are going to perceive as having agency. Right? I think if our understanding of how the brain works and individual differences around, this hypermentalizing suggests that there are going to be people who are prone to forming problematic attachments, let's say. So other things that we need to consider and things that we're looking at in our lab with Malika and others is, well, okay, I mean, I'm not a Luddite. I know that AI is going to be beneficial, but who is it going to benefit? And what are the challenges? So there's different social strata, cultural differences, religious differences, political differences in how people engage with therapy and what benefits they get from it. Will we see initial benefits that don't play out in the long run? I mean, that's a worry of mine with things like AI. And again, we kind of providing a cheap alternative, almost like a band-aid, if you like, of the mental health, the health crisis that we're facing in countries. We're sort of trying to come up with these cheap alternatives rather than providing rich represented or sort of thinking about mental health problems from a more society. And, although I've presented research looking at how the social brain engages with social robots or avatars or anything that's trying to emulate real like social interactions, social conditions, social connections. There isn't that much, or there's very little research looking at how AI itself can elicit social brain activity and differences there. And that's some of the work that we're is hoping my lab, and we're hoping to start in a couple of months. And again, thinking about individual differences. So if people think of AI as having an intelligence or agency, will they respond differently to people who perceive or treat AI as more of a tool? And that's a question that's interesting incorporating into the PhD. I thought I'd just finish up with, like a reminder that technology doesn't really offer political solutions. So mental health is unavoidably political, and a focus on the individual is never going to be enough to improve mental health. So we're kind of focusing in on the individual, focusing on these digital tools that engage with one person to solve their individual problems. This is not going to improve mental health society. We also have to be mindful that AI will inevitably serve the interests of the rich and powerful, just as every other technology has in the past, including those in the internet. And the internet has led to the commodification of social connection. We think that Facebook, Twitter, all of these social media platforms that monetize social interaction, social connection. And it's almost as if they're wanting to build these AIs or getting us to think of the internet or aspects of the internet almost as an intelligent agent itself, which I think ethically is problematic and something that we need to think about. And we're not at the end of history, right? So this is a famous philosophical book by Francis Fukuyama suggesting that liberal democracies and capitalism were sort of arrived at the end of history. Well, I don't think that's played out in the last few years, and I certainly don't think that's going to be the case moving forward. And in a way, AI is kind of reflecting back ourselves. It's just picking up all this fragmented information that's available on the internet, forming these predictive models and spewing back ourselves. And I think that's fine, and AI is going to have an amazing place and an amazing role to play. But I think we need to be mindful and hopeful that we can be a little bit more imaginative about new futures, new things, new understandings of what it means to be human, how we live together, and how we improve mental health. And I think we need to be mindful of as society becomes more individualistic or atomized, we have this loneliness endemic across many Western countries. Is digital AI therapy the answer? I'll leave it there. I apologize for the horrible slide presentation to the technical and the fragmented nature of the talk, but hopefully it was somewhat entertaining. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I think your messaging came across clearly, so not to worry about the visuals and whatnot. Yes, we've got 10 minutes, and Malika, yes, your hand is up, but please, everyone engage in this conversation. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. It was so interesting. I'm not sure if Craig is on the call, but I had a conversation a couple of months ago with Craig. Reminded me, like your talk reminded me of that conversation. And I wanted to ask this as like an open discussion. Do we think empathy is what we receive or what we give as a feeling? And like where does the feeling of empathy stands? So this question is really important for me because when we talk about the relationships or like the affection, I wonder like in our brain or in our feeling, how do we distinguish the feeling of empathy when we are talking to a human, or like showing affection to an animal or talking to a robot? So Yeah, I wanted to ask this question as an open discussion to Andrew, to anyone that is interested to talk.
I can start off with if someone else would like to jump in. Ed, see you've got your hand up. Jump in.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question that you've asked, Malika, and I actually jotted it down here as well. And I think it is the attribution of mental state to AI. It is like what Gilbert Ryle would say, it is a category mistake. So we put in AI in a category where it did not originally belong. And when it comes to the idea of empathy, I think the African conception of personhood would offer you that best insight, Malika, and I think I'd share like a paper with you. So Thaddeus Smith, an African philosopher, okay, let's say in the social conception of person from Africa, sub-Saharan African value system. So in sub-Saharan African value system, a person is defined based on some normative criteria. That is their interaction with members of the community, whereby, and the criteria for personhood is the notion of identity and solidarity. So where identity would mean an individual being capable of identifying with others, and then in solidarity, be empathetic towards others. Now, empathy is something that is shared that goes vice versa, and that is what actually makes one a moral agent within the African moral system, whereby I have to continually show empathy towards the other, and I have to be open enough to receive empathy from the other towards me. And a being that is not capable of this reciprocity of empathy cannot be theorized or categorized as the person. And I can share a paper that really outlines that perfectly well. And I think it also boils down to what Andrew was talking about in terms of the commodification of social connections. And you could see that now we've commodified social connection in such a way that we've taken the authenticity of the value of social relations and the value of empathy that is embedded in social relations as well. And of course, it's because of capitalist and economic interest. And this is the problematic, this is the problem that we find. And that is why AI is proliferating, because again, it's also a matter of echo chambers and epistemic bubble, because there's this echo chamber that is all over our faces saying AI can be empathetic, AI can do things around mental health, and so it has proliferated, and as a result of that, we've just jumped into this bandwagon without really understanding the economic and the commodified aspects that are embedded in all of this. But yeah, but I think this is a very, very interesting talk, Andrew. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Em. Is it Ubuntu, the philosophical kind of
Yes,
I am,
yes,
yes, we are? I
yeah,
always present at the start of my social neuroscience lectures here at the University of Kent, because I think it captures. It's almost like Western science catching up with maybe the Ubuntu philosophical point of view, right? Because a lot of the work that we're doing now, and a lot of social neuroscience is trying to move much more towards understanding social interaction. We cannot just put social images on a two-dimensional screen and ask people, oh, do you feel like this is a social stimuli or not? We need to be studying the interaction with people, and preferably present in front of each other. And there's been some fascinating insights that have come about from trying to understand our social lives, not from looking inside one of us, but from looking at the synchrony between people. I touched on it a bit in my talk. It's quite fascinating. So not only do we start to subtly synchronize and mimic others at a behavioral level, but also the way we talk, our tone, and also our minds start to synchronize, right? So as we form these social bonds, these connections, as we start to understand people, people are doing studies now showing that it's our brains are starting to fire in similar ways. And the closer we feel to that person, the sort of more similar the pattern of neural activity will be. And so I think there you have a nice framework of how thinking about empathy, I don't think it really works to think, well, is it something that I give or something that I receive? I think it's a shared phenomenon at the level of social interaction. And I think that's what Ed was saying. Um, Much better than I did before.
Okay, thank you. We've got 5 minutes, so hopefully we can take Kevin and Anna's questions.
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in this. Does it matter? And the reason I say that is that, empathy is an evolved response for, I think, immediate social context. I think it develops into something else. So I think there's an immediate short run use and requirement for it that develops into something much longer. You're talking about much more sophisticated and much deeper building. And it sort of kind of goes to the heart of the AI thing. I think, if AI triage works for people with mental health problems, that is better than nothing. But there are clearly very, very dystopian implications about using it for much other than short-run triage. And I think that's the way perhaps we should be framing it, because we're never going to be able to resource mental health to the level we need to solve the problem, because it's just got too big. It's got to be too big a problem.
Okay, and if you don't mind commenting as well, just you were waiting patiently.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, interesting discussion. I mean, a couple of things. I agree that I'm as a person sort of have been rather at the coalface trying to work out the best way to provide assistance and help to people. I do think that AI does have a role to play in triage in terms of like reducing some of those queues, which are pretty soul destroying actually, when you've got lots of them going on and lots of distressed people not even funneled into the right streams at the right time. So that's one thing. But there's something, I guess, a bit more provocative, I might say, and which I'm quite interested in. I mean, I wonder about the roles for AI as kind of clinical assistants, if you like. So, for example, if I'm doing cognitive therapy with somebody, but I want them to, for example, to practice challenging thoughts every day when they get up. Well, I'm not going to be there every day for them, but if we had an AI assistant who could conversationally guide them through some of that sort of quite algorithmic thought challenging, which I would do if I was a person doing it with them. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be aware of like the much bigger context, and that's a different matter. But again, I think these could help us, potentially improve the effectiveness of therapies, because we know nudge interventions and continual practice are better than just seeing a person for 50 minutes and then having nothing for the rest of the time. And I just wonder if there's a sweet spot, Andrew, around, one wants to sort of, I'm sure I'm using the wrong terminology, but kind of projects that kind of relating to a machine in that context, just to help you to get through the specifics of the task. So if you can't do that, then you probably won't engage. But obviously, we don't want you to fall in love with the AI, or indeed ditch your therapist for them completely. So I think it's a kind of subtle field, and I'd be really interested to see how it evolves over the next few years, but very interesting to think about linking it to that kind of brain function, what's happening. And like let's say, is there a kind of sweet spot that's okay, and then either side, it's kind of like a normal distribution, with one side, people can't relate at all, and the other side, people want to marry their chatbots. Anyway, they're my thoughts.
Yeah, I think AI alongside a therapist is a very powerful tool, like for all the reasons that you said. And we're doing some work here around triage and autism and ADHD service, for example, using AI. There's some clinical psychologists and how we do that. Another thing was around clinical notes, which I know takes up a lot of time for a psychologist, so they spend far too much time writing up notes rather than delivering therapy. AI can be incorporated to sort of take up some of that work. It frees up the psychologist and therapist time to be doing what they're best at, right, which is interact with people. So I think AI is a fantastic tool. I use it all the time. I use it as a bit of a life coach myself, right? I put questions to AI all the time. And it does sometimes feel like I'm talking to an agent. So it does trick me a little bit. And I think my message is not one of, oh, AI is to be avoided at all costs. I think it's just like you were saying, Anne, there's a sweet spot. Right? I don't think we know what that is at the moment because it's such an emerging field. And I think some of the work that I've been wants to do in her PhD is going to be really important and push the field a little bit forward in terms of understanding, again, towards your point now, that what is this distribution of people? How are they going to engage with AI? Can we understand who may find it more beneficial or more problematic? And I think we just need to be aware of how, as humans, we are processing this information because it's not a tool that we've ever seen before. It's going to our brains are going to respond to it in a different way to tools that we're used to and that we're using that we have been using recently. So I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done. As a social neuroscientist, I think that how we think about as a sort of social agent is going to be important.
Andrew, sorry to stop you there. We've just run over a little bit. So hopefully our next speaker, Cassandra, will find that sweet spot for us. But what I'm going to do is just thank you very much for your time. It was really thought-provoking, and I think it's very nice. It got my brain going a lot. So thank you everyone for engaging with this session. I'm going to stop the session and